What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Other Guys on the Badlands Podcast Network. I'm Jake Chatsky, joined as always by Paul Kilgallen. We're going to talk a little bit about free agency today with the drop of Joe's free agency big board and talk about some movement on the free agency market already. One of the big names on top of the board is off the table. Paul, how you doing? How you feeling?
Yeah, feeling good. Typical Jets, we get that leak over the weekend, or I guess it wasn't really a leak so much as it was just a source saying that Mike Evans was going to hit free agency, and it caught fire pretty quick. But it's very typical Jets fan for us to be like to take that as like, oh, he's coming to the Jets, right? And just add it to the names of almost Jets. And so I'm good. It is lying season. We can't believe everything we hear on Twitter for the next, several weeks probably up until kind of we get back into the summer where we're closer to training camp. So I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm on the East Coast visiting some family this weekend, and yeah, just excited to get back into the thick of the offseason. The Jets are the offseason champs, as everyone who's got big board and war room access knows already. But we're diving into the meat and potatoes of what makes Badlands, and I'm excited for us to really take a crack at that because obviously this is our first year with like a podcast in this part of the football season. And it's obviously really exciting stuff for Jets fans. So let's dive right into it. The biggest name on the free agency board this year was Mike Evans. He was number one on Joe's big free agent board. He has signed a 2-year deal with $52 million, $35 million guaranteed to go back to the Buccaneers. Paul, a couple of questions. One, did this surprise you in any way? And two, how does this change, if at all, the priorities that the Jets should have this offseason?
Yeah, it didn't surprise me. I think the leak over the weekend surprised me more that he's going to test free agency and he wants to see what his market value is and everything like that. But it's like then you see it in hindsight after he signs this contract and you're like, none of this is surprising. Like, of course he wanted to leak out that he wanted to hit free agency, right? So it always becomes clearer in hindsight once the picture is completed. But it was like there was a temporary, kind of momentary, like, oh wow, like maybe that is a possibility over the weekend. And then again, we came pretty quickly to a resolution with him going back to Tampa. It never really made a ton of sense for him to leave Tampa. And I always do get a little sensitive about like the building a super team type thing and bringing in a ton of mercenaries. I know the Jets have had some success with that in the past, especially like, the 98 team had a good amount of veteran mercenaries who came in and were able to contribute in a meaningful way. The 2009, 2010 teams had some of the same. With those teams, it was a lot of linemen who were not necessarily on like the final years of their career. They were just kind of on the back nine. So there is a blueprint for that working here, but there's also a few examples of it like really not working well. I think the one that comes to everybody's mind immediately is that Eagles team with Vince Young as like the backup quarterback, and they were talking a lot of shit in the preseason about all the veterans that were on that team and how they were a super team and everything. So I always get a little sensitive to that too, not in terms of like it's not going to work, but just in terms of the combustibility of that many big personalities coming into one spot at the same time. And that's not to say that if they signed Mike Evans, I would have been upset, right? Like that's not what I'm getting at all. Mike Evans is a monster. We've talked about him on here before, probably one of the more underrated pass catchers of our lifetimes. Just for whatever reason, like he's been on Super Bowl teams, right? Like he was with Brady for a little while. He's also had a lot of bad quarterback play in his career. And because of a couple drops and some bad quarterback play, I think probably he doesn't get the credit that he's due. But all in all, not surprised at how this all played out. Like I said at the top, this is kind of lying season, right? So we should expect to hear things that are in direct contrast to what we are expecting for the next couple weeks. And people are out there lying. Everybody's trying to gain position and get in the best spot. So
Yeah, I think to your point about Mike Evans being underrated, to put up the stats that he's done with bad quarterback play, 1,000-yard season every season of his career is like simply unbelievable. And he's going to have one of those careers that when he decides to hang him up, we're going to look back and look at the numbers he put up and look at like the people he's in conversations with and be like, holy shit. Like,
Yeah.
he is on, it's, it's weird to compare him, but like statistically, like what he's done for the Bucks, what Calvin Johnson was doing for the Lions, and the team has had more success and he gets less credit. I think obviously he's less of an athletic freak than Megatron, but in terms of just like the statistical impact he's had on that football team and just being the guy for a decade now. The fact that he was going to hit free agency, we talked about this on an earlier episode, but there was sort of a tier of wide receiver class that he was in all by himself in this free agency class. And there's some other guys that I think it would be worth, the Jets going after for sure. They need help in the wide receiver room. But getting Mike Evans would have been adding a true number one across from Garrett Wilson in a way that none of the other free agent wide receivers would have impacted this team in that way. So I think it definitely does shift the free agency strategy a little bit now that he's not a realistic or not an option at all. Because if he was a realistic option, I think you could have gone about building this team in a couple different ways, and now there's fewer avenues to do that.
Yeah, and if they were able to get him, he's the type of player that's worth kind of rethinking your whole strategy, right? Like, okay,
Totally.
if we can get Mike Evans, like, let's commit the money there, and then we'll figure everything else out because he is such an impactful player. He's not going to get hurt. He's going to produce 1,000 yards. He's going to do all these things. He's going to be a reliable red zone target. We have somebody that we can chuck the fade to every time we're inside the 10-yard line. Like, he kind of changes the math on so many things that he's the type of player that is worth changing up your strategy a little bit, where we all kind of think the strategy is just do everything you can to build an offensive line and then we'll figure everything else out. I think it would shift to, okay, we have this player, next is offensive line, and then we'll kind of move some other pieces around.
So speaking of the offensive line, now, especially now that that money is not going to be allocated to a premier guy like Mike Evans, there are a couple different areas in this free agency class where the Jets could invest in offensive line. In the top 10 on the Badlands big board, there are several, or I shouldn't say several, but there's in the top 10 players, 4 of them are offensive guards. You got Kevin Dotson at 3, Mike Onwenu at 4, Robert Hunt at 5, and Kevin Zeitler at 9. Above all those players is one tackle, and it's Tyron Smith coming in at 2. So I obviously like tackle is a more premium position than the interior. Tyron Smith is going to command more money. So the question I'd pose to you is this, and we've heard Joe say that they should 2008 this thing and just fucking sign everyone, totally revamp the wall. I think that's a great option. We're all for that. But in a limited resources world and a world where we want to add a wide receiver to this team, would you rather the Jets sign Tyron Smith to a more premium contract and lock up one of the tackle spots, or sign up one of the guards and say, we are going to commit to AVT being a full-time tackle this season. We're adding this guard. We've got, Tipman at guard or center, and, sort of revamp the line that way. Adding new talent to the interior and kicking AVT out versus adding talent to one of the tackle spots and keeping AVT a guard.
Yeah. Like so many moving parts to this line discussion. And it's almost like this, and I'm not saying that this would be a good permanent change for the NFL league year schedule, but this year, I feel like the Jets would benefit if free agency was after the draft, right? And I think typically like you want free agency to be before the draft because you want to know who you can get there, who you can spend some money on, and then you go into the draft with like a clearer picture of your needs. This year, we don't need a clearer picture of our needs. Like we know what they are, right? And because of the group of linemen that are in the top of the draft, there's a lot, like there's 2 kind of like pure tackles. And then everybody else is like, is he a guard? Is he a tackle? Where do we want to put him at the pro level? Does he go right? Does he go left? Like there's all this interior, exterior, left and right flexibility with that whole second tier of offensive linemen in the draft. So it would almost be beneficial to like see where we land in the draft, see what guy we get, and then pivot the free agency strategy from there. Because
And
go
the
ahead.
Jets are the only team where that's the case because we have so many needs. Like
Right.
most other teams are like, all right, we're, if we're the Chargers or we're the Giants, it's like we're set at one of the tackle spots. We need to go find a right tackle. That's why if we can't get one in free agency, maybe we'll adjust our draft strategy. The Jets are like, we need tackles everywhere. So like whichever one falls to us in the draft, great. Let's plug the other hole in free agency. Unfortunately, the order's backwards. Sorry for interrupting. Continue.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like it's a strange spot that we're in this year where we know what we need, the Jets know what they need, everybody knows what we need. The whole world knows what we need. And so because of that, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to kind of manipulate our way around the draft because everybody knows what we're doing. And so in this case, it might be more helpful to just grab whoever you can at the right value spot and then figure out the other pieces around that. Like get the best player that we could plug in on any part of this